Okay, name the cartoon character that best describes your leadership style.
Okay. Okay. You want me to tell you? Or you
Yeah,
tell me.
tell me. No, you're going to tell me.
Phineas Flynn. Phineas
I don't
and
even
Ferb.
know who that is. So
Phineas and Ferb. He's super enthusiastic, and he's inclusive. He's intelligent, so I'm only 2/3 of that. So I'm 2/3 of Phineas Flynn. There's some other things, but it was just really cool that he would be very creative. And I like to be creative and sharing the gospel.
The first thing that came to me was Goofy, but I know that's so mean because it really doesn't describe it. It doesn't really describe your leadership style. It more describes you as a person. So I guess you're right. I'm wrong. I'm not right. Okay. Welcome to Grace Desert's podcast. I have the absolute privilege today to sit here with our representative from the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, otherwise known as FCA, and he also happens to be my husband of almost 30 years, Tom Scheck. We're so glad you're sitting down with us today.
As am I.
I love sitting down with you. It's like my favorite thing.
Let's go.
But not usually when cameras are on. I just love sitting
True
with you.
that.
Anyway, so that's a yay. So I know probably everything about you, but people are watching who may know nothing about you, but also nothing about the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. So I want you just to first introduce yourself, tell us what your role is with FCA, but also, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Tom. And so FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Let me go back a little bit and set up and frame out what FCA is. It started in 1954. There is a gentleman named Don McLennan who went in and spoke to Branch Rickey about if athletes can promote alcohol and cigarettes, why can't they promote things about the Lord? So Branch Rickey, who actually signed Jackie Robinson, said, I'll give you 15 minutes, and 2 hours later, he walks out with a support check to start FCA. So
Wow.
the first...
Who gave the support check?
Branch Rickey, who is a baseball scout. So the first actual meeting with FCA was a camp. I think it was in Colorado Springs in 1954. College athletes, college football players, college coaches. And they brought them together and they wanted to improve upon their skill sets, but also wanted to influence them for Jesus. So they shared the gospel with them. These kids are coming to Christ. These coaches are coming to Christ. It was glorious, and they realized that when they sent them back to their schools, that they were going back into the same environment that they came out of, and there really just wasn't this community and accountability and people that would walk with them. So they labeled and came up with something called a huddle. So when we meet on school campuses, it's called a huddle. I know it references football, but we have multi-sport huddles. So FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, when we meet on campuses, two misnomers. One of them is you don't have to be an athlete, and you don't have to be a Christian. We are welcoming. We want everybody to come in and hear the gospel message and hear about God's love. So my responsibility in the South Bay and the South Bay Beach City's director, and it's twofold. It's talent advancement and ministry advancement. Talent advancement is inviting people to come on staff, whether it's going to be part-time, full-time, or even a role called an ambassador, which it's usually anywhere from 3 to 10 hours a week where they come in and they visit campuses and they oversee it. The other one is ministry advancement, where we lay out the structure of what a multi-sport huddle looks like. When I say that, I mean that we go to where the kids are. First of all, why FCA? I believe that FCA creates the greatest platform through sports. 90% of people in America are involved in sports in one way or another. So the greatest platform is sports. On the greatest mission field, which is the high school, middle school campuses. We have now this Gen Alpha, which goes back to 2010, 2012. Before that was Gen Zers. And then we even want to invite those who have already graduated and gone on, the millennials, the Gen Xers, and it's even for the baby boomers as we go out and get volunteers. But the idea is to specifically create an atmosphere and an opportunity on campus at lunch, because the kids are all there, depending on what campus, anywhere from 2,800 to 2,000. We invite them in, and we create this really cool environment that we've got this music that's playing. It creates energy. People stand at the doors, coaches, kids, greeters, giving them high fives. Hey, it's great to be here. We've got this music, and then all of a sudden it settles down. We open up in prayer. We have pizza. Okay. So the thing about pizza, it's amazing.
I love it's my favorite. You know, it's my favorite.
I do
food.
know it's your favorite food.
Good pizza.
You should come to Huddles. Yes.
Not necessarily the pizza you have at your Huddles. It's okay. I'll take all pizza.
Okay.
But
yeah, kids don't have such a discriminating palate as you do when it comes to pizza. So we get 60% more kids when we have pizza as opposed to when they don't. Free food brings them on. There's this great motto that West High has: come for pizza, stay for Jesus. So we hand out, we give out pizza, have some time interact, kids interact in, and then we play this really dumb, goofy game to kind of break down any barriers. And after that, there's just this sense of community that the Spirit of God really was very gracious to give us during our meetings. And someone will stand up 8-10 minutes, give a testimony, share something that God put on their heart. Student athletes will get up and share their story, something that God has really walking them through. And it's really dynamic to see what God has done since the school year in September. We've had 118 student athletes come to faith in Christ. We've handed out over 100 Bibles, because we can bring Bibles on campuses.
which is unbelievable. People don't believe that.
And the kids love it. And it's just really cool, to say, hey, we got Bibles. Who wants one? And they're all raising their hands. We make sure that the kids who give their lives to Christ will get a Bible, and that we want to connect them either to a youth pastor or a volunteer for the onboarding of walking with Jesus. So, yes, I'm still going.
No.
Take a breath.
Take a breath, because I don't want to overlook some things that you said. First of all, you did a good go. You actually told me stuff I didn't know, so this is exciting. You're just full of surprises, Tom. Okay, so the Huddles on campus, you mentioned the students, different athletes or different students in what leadership for that school in FCA leadership will share. So students are actually sharing to their peers. And you would be there. You said different local youth pastors will come in order to connect the kids to local youth groups and so forth. Volunteers will come, sometimes bring pizza. It sounds like there's like a real, there's a lot of people involved, which is super cool, and lots of opportunity for involvement, which is super cool.
So, to your point, yes, it's a community of people who come in, inviting volunteers, moms or dads. I've got this mod squad, MOD, mom or dad, that invite in. And the crazy thing is that the kids, when I invite their mom or dad on, they're like, oh, don't go, guys, this is so embarrassing. Oh, no.
Sounds like our kid.
Yeah, it does. And then they come on campus, and at the very end, the kids are like, oh my gosh, your dad's so cool, your mom's so cool. So it's a really cool point for a parent and a child that come together like, hey, all kids think their parents are dorky, but when other kids affirm them and affirm the parents, it's really cool. So we have the greatest platform, which is sports, and the greatest mission field, which is our campuses, with the greatest influencers. At this time, it's the coaches and the athletes. When it comes to coaches, Billy Graham said that a coach impacts more people in 1 year than most people impact in a lifetime. And so I'll invite coaches on if they're walking with the Lord, share their story, because then all of a sudden these kids can identify, hey, he's on Team Jesus, and can go in and ask for prayer, or just go in if they're having problems, ask questions, or just, can you pray for me? But also the opportunity for the coach to kind of step out of their comfort zone, and because coaches can be isolated. They can feel isolated being a coach, but then when they get in front of kids and they can share, their faith goes to the next level. And then the next question is, hey, coach, you know what? Don't know what church you go to, but I'd just like to walk with you, because if I walked up to a coach and I said, hey, what is the one thing that you would love to see on your team elevate. And it's probably more buy-in from the kids. And we have, FCA has something called an 360 Coach. Actually, it's that and that. It's a journal and a book. And what it does is it walks coaches through the idea that athletes in sports is just more than skill sets. Not doing more skills, not throwing more balls, not running more, not punitive when it comes to running, but it's about understanding kids' minds and understanding their hearts. And if you understand their mind, you can get into that and not treat them in a performance-based environment, but that they're positionally based because of who they are. They have value for who they are. Then the coaches will see, hey, what's going on in their mind that maybe they're not given enough, or maybe you want more, that they can have a conversation. And then ultimately, it's to get to their heart. What is their motivation behind things? And as they go up, coaches understanding kids' hearts, and they being able to even introduce Jesus is a shorter connecting point than going from a skill set to, hey, what's going on in your heart? So we walk coaches through, first of all, getting their relationship with Jesus tight, that their example to their team and their other coaches is something that would be a good reflection of Jesus, that they're not cursing and they're not just dropping words that they shouldn't drop, and that they can be seen as someone who is a role model. So walking with them in all areas, not only in coaching, but some of the struggles they have, their marriages, and even being a parent.
Let's talk a little bit about identity. Since I've known you, I've heard you talk a lot about identity, and you coming from having been a professional athlete in a season in your life, but also playing baseball your entire life through college and then a short time professionally, but not knowing Christ during that. I've heard you talk a lot about how your identity was so wrapped up in your sport, and how you see that and see how prevalent that is even today in our young people, especially athletes. So just talk a little bit more about that and how FCA enters into that space with kids.
Yeah, being on campuses and talking to kids, I think two questions just elevate. One of them is, who am I and what am I doing here? And the who am I question is what is my value? What's my identity? What is my purpose? And not knowing it growing up, it was not only exhausting, but it was so hard and challenging. I started doing drugs and drinking when I was 12, just because I was so jammed up in my head and who people thought I was and who I wanted to be and how I wanted them to perceive me, that I'm like, this is, at 12 years old, I'm like, this isn't sustainable. But looking back on it, it wasn't sustainable. So I looked to these avenues just to medicate my brain, and also really to forget some of the decisions that I had made from a really early age. And so going out and living in a sport that is really performance based, I realize when I'm up at 11, 12 o'clock working out or swinging a bat, I'm like, yeah, nobody else is swinging a bat at midnight. If I'm up early in the morning, I'm first on the field, last one off the field, just grinding, so that when other people see me, that, hey, you are worth and you're valuable enough to go from high school to college, and ultimately from college, that somebody would offer me a job professionally. And as I said, it was absolutely exhausting.
I bet. How did coming to Christ change this for you?
Yeah. So that was the unbelievable transformational moment when I heard the gospel of grace and forgiveness, that I was accepted for who I was as a created child that God has created, and before the world began, that he knew I was going to be here. When I saw and realized who I was and how God saw me, it was freeing. Things just fell off. You know this story, but the first time I took communion was probably a few weeks after I got saved. I wrestled not only with drinking and doing drugs, but I chewed tobacco for 10 years, and that was actually the hardest thing, to stop chewing tobacco. But I took communion for the first time, and I stood up and I walked away, and I had zero desire to do any of those. I mean, it was just this unbelievable moment of the power of God in my life that it was so cool that not only would God see me for who I was and the value I had in him, but also that he would give me the strength and the power to live out a relationship with him and live it out in a way that would be pleasing to him.
So how did you first get involved with FCA? And was your testimony of where the Lord brought you from and how your identity was so completely wrapped up in your performance, but yet how the Lord just completely delivered you and set you free, was that burden for other athletes part of that? But so just share with us how you first got involved. And
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's good. So 27 years, nobody ever shared the gospel with me. So I get saved. I was getting ready to go get my master's in sports psychology. The plan was I'm going to play pro ball for 3 years, and I'm going to, in the interim of that, I'm going to get my master's in sports psychology and go back and work for the Giants. There was a sports psychologist with the Giants that would come up to me in spring training and say, hey, you know what? I have an athlete that's coming up and thinking this, and this. What do you think? And I'm like, well, shoot, if you're asking me questions, I'm going to get it down. Come back and take your job. So, yeah, I gave my life to Christ, and instead of going to get my master's, I went to Bible college and helped plant a church. And so in the midst of planting a church and sharing the gospel, but just growing the ministry, I first heard about FCA because, my thought was, man, I wished for all these years that I played baseball for 20 years, I wish I'd have played a guitar or something. At least I'd have a measurable talent as opposed to, I can throw BP and swing a bat and field the ground ball. But then I heard about FCA, and someone at the church was contacted by somebody else, and they're going on to Gardena High. And I'm like, hey, can I come along? And he goes, yeah. So I went on the campus, and I'm seeing these kids, and I'm like, oh, my gosh, that is me. And we have this opportunity to share the gospel with them. And I'm like, I was all in. I was so super stoked about that. And, and so from there, it went on to another campus that as I was pastoring that I volunteered at, and that was the inner city school at Washington Prep.
Tell us about your time at Washington Prep. Because that you went onto that campus because even though the huddles are student-led, right? They have to be student-initiated. They have to find someone on campus to facilitate their classroom or the gym. A teacher has to be there. They also need outside support, right? So this huddle, FCA didn't have a staff person who could be there or a volunteer who could be there. So they reached out to you and said, hey, can you get on Washington Prep?
We have this campus here. Can you get on it? And I said, sure. So the director and I went to Washington Prep and met the athletic director there and just said, hey, what do you think? We'd like to get it going. And she was like, yeah, we'd love to. So we set up this time. So we met on Wednesdays at lunch. And so I'm there on Wednesday. I have some pizza. I'm in the athletic office waiting for lunch to happen. And while we're standing there, a kid 15 feet away on the other side of the wall gets stabbed and killed. And I just shook me. And I'm like, golly, this shouldn't happen. And these kids are in just a really tough, hard environment, and yet they're fighting every single day, and just to create an atmosphere and an opportunity for them to come and hear Jesus and say, you know what, there's hope in Jesus. You don't have to just continue to go down this path. And some of the kids that would come in, and there was this kid he was a great kid, and I asked the athletic director where he was, and she said that he got suspended. And I asked her why, and he said, well, he got in a fight in the locker room because these two kids were punking him because his mom was a prostitute, and they just kept grinding him, and he kind of went off on him. And I'm like, these are the kids that are just, they don't have hope, and just being able to take God's love there, and a hope not only of eternal life, but a hope that who you are in God, it changes everything. Walking with Jesus is a game changer. So going on campuses and being able to share the greatest message of all time was something when that happened. So I'm all in.
I feel like that huddle, I remember going to visit Washington Prep's huddles with you, and I've been to a lot of your huddles, obviously in the South Bay, but I feel like there were more kids at that huddle than there's ever been in the South Bay. And there's some big huddles here where there's 50, 75 kids who come every week. But I feel like that one, it was in the gymnasium. I feel like there was at least always 100 kids or more. And often I remember some of the kids just didn't have lunch. And they would just come because there was no food, or they didn't want to get the free food because, again, they didn't want to be, then there was like a more distinction of who was getting free food, who wasn't, and they didn't want to be put in that category, right, labeled. And I know when you would go visit the games and the kids would say, hey, Coach Tom, come visit my game, come to my game. And you would go and you would see the visiting side, right? The visitors just have so many parents there, and you would see Washington Prep side, and there would just be a handful of people. And I remember that time because feel like I had young kids, and we had young kids at the time, and I might have even been pregnant. And I just remember how you felt so compelled that anytime a kid said, come to my game, or they call you Pastor Tom, I think. I feel like they looked at you as like campus pastor, like it was, which was so bizarre. I feel like they called you that, which is so interesting. But you felt so compelled to go to these games because they had no kids there. And I know your heart as well, as much as you're here in the South Bay and your heart's for the South Bay, you want FCAs to get built up more in West LA and Los Angeles. And it's because it's a hard area to reach, and it's hard to get people to want to go because it's hard. But I know your prayer because I'm with you in this, and it's God raise up people that will go, and not just here in the South Bay, our Jerusalem, but the Judea, the South Centrals and the East LA, and the places where there's just not a plethora of parental volunteers. They're either working or there's a single family. They have one parent in the home. What's the percentage? I mean, I didn't mean to go on and on about Washington Prep, but there is this huge percentage of that
70% of
do not
the
live
kids
with a parent.
were not with a biological parent, or they
That's
were
overwhelming.
in foster care or in a group home.
Or living with a relative of some sort.
We had a handful of kids who were sleeping with a relative in a car. And so, yeah. And it was, but it was tough. Having kids ask me during father-son games, hey, I don't have a dad and my dad's incarcerated. Would you mind coming and being that representative? I'm like, yeah, it was just super cool. So
I know this conversation is making you want to go get back
to
Washington Prep.
I've never actually, truth be told, I've never actually wanted to. I've always had this draw for South Central in LA. So I don't know what God's going to do, but I pray that He does something.
But what's a misconception that people have about FCA, whether it's with volunteers or with students? What's a misconception you feel like they have?
I as I said earlier, you don't have to be a Christian or an athlete to come to the huddles. I think a misconception.
Because I'm definitely not an athlete, and I got to
a bowling trophy when you were 14.
Yeah. Hey. I did get a bowling trophy. That's not nice.
I
know.
I'm pumping you
Give
up.
me some props.
Right, man.
Yes.
That you have to be an athlete or you have to be athletic, because athletics is just the platform. Greatest message of all time, the gospel being shared. Kids coming to know Jesus. I mean, our vision is that the world would be transformed by Jesus Christ through the influence of coaches and athletes. And our mission would be that to invite every coach and athlete into a growing relationship with Jesus and His church. So it's disciples who make disciples who make disciples. And the methodology is to engage people with the gospel, to equip those who know Jesus, and ultimately to empower them to go out and replicate that. So volunteers who have a heart for Jesus, have a heart for young people who enjoy sports, to come and invest into our next generation.
So how can people get involved first to the student who's watching, who doesn't have an FCA huddle on their campus, and they're like, wow, I want that on my campus. What does that student first need to do?
First of all, contact me, and we'll get it going. I know that there is a particular student that goes here, and we've been trying to get on a campus, and it really comes down to bandwidth, having a volunteer, a mom or a dad, who would say, hey, I can be there when you're not. I can help launch it, but we need some stability with some volunteers. And
okay. What about parental volunteer? How can a
parental
parent get involved? Say, email you.
Yeah, same thing.
What do you need from parents? What do you need from not just parents,
So
but what do you need from people, adults who are watching and say, I want to get involved with that ministry?
Yeah, so contact me. We can sit down and have coffee, share the vision of FCA and kind of lay out what that would look like. I explained a little bit of what that would look like, multi-sport. We also have sport-specific, which is either whatever sport it is, baseball. I do baseball one at South. They do one at Ambassador. They just walk the baseball players through the core book, and it explains the gospel and then walks through the importance of spiritual training, understanding God's word, connecting with others, and the power of the Spirit as we live for Jesus. But when it comes to a volunteer, a mom or a dad to come on, and we have a training, it's a very brief training to mobilize volunteers. It's about an hour and a half, and it's just a 35,000-foot view of what FCA is, what our purpose is, what we want to accomplish. And then in the midst of that, we just have a brief application to be a ministry. It's a ministry leader application. And then in doing so, they will be sanctioned by FCA, that when they go do FCA events, they're covered if something would happen, that FCA insurance covers, or any state in the United States and 137 countries.
Wow. FCA is in 130 countries. That's fantastic. Okay. Looking forward a little bit, Tom, what is your biggest goal for 2024?
So FCA we started building out, it's two arms. We started really building out the second arm, and that is FCA Sport, and that is in the community. So if something happens and we are not invited anymore to come off of campuses or kicked off of campuses, what happens to the ministry? It can't. Yeah. So we're building out community sports, and it's FCA Sport, whether it's basketball, baseball, volleyball, softball, just to raise up teams and leagues and club teams so that we can walk with these kids from a young age, 5, 6, and 7, all the way through, so that they understand that as they are a child of Christ and a follower of Jesus, that they are positionally based value, not performance-based, and then bring in coaches and train coaches to coach them well. And there's a lot of different lanes and a lot of different sports to do that, but that's what I'd love to see in 2024 and in the future, is that we take over the South Bay for Jesus when it comes to athletics. I mean, in general, but just specifically in that arm with FCA.
I know you do a lot of baseball camps that are free of charge, and you have an opportunity at those camps to share the love of Jesus with the kids who come, which is always amazing. But that's easy for you to do because baseball is your sport. Sure, you can facilitate other camps, but you're not a soccer player, right? So you probably would imagine need volunteers. Well, I know you need volunteers, people who played college sport of any sport, because they can come and be your whatever, right? What is that called? Like the coach at that camp. So like if you did a soccer camp, you need someone who knows soccer better than you to really run the
if we're running
camp.
A clinic, we need clinicians. And you don't have to, thank you. You don't,
what are they called? The people who do the stuff.
You don't have to be even a college athlete or play in college. You can play in high school or just have a working understanding of how the game is, because we have littles all the way up to 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Ultimately, we can get high school teams going, but we need to start somewhere, and that is just to bring awareness, to invite parents and invite kids into it. So when we're talking about South LA and Washington Prep, and when I had an opportunity to step into a role with FCA as at the time as an area rep vocationally. I was praying, and I was really torn. But as I was praying, God very graciously led me to Jacob and Joseph. And in Genesis 45:27, it says that when Jacob heard that Joseph was alive, his heart was revived. And so we talked about those who are challenged in South Central and just economically and socioeconomically and even socio-emotionally challenged. It's the same in the beach cities. They're, up and outers. You have parents who both have careers, and maybe they grew up in a church. Maybe they went to church recently, but because of, Mark chapter 4 talks about the cares of the world, deceitfulness of riches, choke out God's word. And now these kids are by themselves. My heart was like, hey, let's get these kids plugged in and hearing about the gospel and walking with Jesus, and then pull their parents back in. And we've seen that just over and over again the last 11 years. It's really cool.
That's awesome. What is like an obstacle for you? Like when you look at 2024, what you want to do, what you want to accomplish, what's one of your biggest obstacles?
One was bandwidth.
I will attest to that.
Started to build out West LA. So spent a lot of time up there and on the phone and meetings and on calls. But I think volunteer-based, because there's, got a couple ambassadors and some... What
does an ambassador do? So you mentioned that.
So an ambassador,
you said 3 to 10 hours a week.
An ambassador comes on to a campus, and they're committed to campus ministry. So whether they're going to the meetings, multi-sport meetings, they will also help facilitate leadership meetings so that the ministry can continue to grow and develop and flourish and then establish this legacy. Juniors and seniors who will reach out and get underclassmen and walk with them. And then we have leaders that are at high schools who will go and speak at middle schools. So as they transition from 8th grade into high school, hey, don't forget we have FCA on this campus, and this is when it is. Man, we'd love you to come join us and be a part of community with you. So from a volunteer base, we can only be at one. We can only be at one place at one time, and if we've got 18 huddles in the South Bay with leadership meetings, that's a lot of meetings. And
that right. If you look at, there's 5 days a week, and you just said there's 18 different huddles at different campuses in the South Bay,
including leadership meetings.
That would mean even if you got to one every single day, you barely can get to one a month. And I'm assuming some you can't even get to every month. If there's multiple huddles on the same day, you may get to them every other month or every few months. It just depends.
Yeah, and that's where ambassadors come in. I can check in with the ambassadors. Hey, how's this going? How can I walk with you? What are your challenges? What are some things that I can help with? And
so you need volunteers. Basically, you can commit to a school, a huddle. Maybe they have a child at that school would obviously make most sense. And I think that's what you're saying. Being on the campus with their child is amazing, even though sometimes the kids don't like it. It ends up usually turning out okay. They could bring pizza right to that huddle. So there's ways that they can kind of help own a school, even if they don't do it alone, maybe with another parent or maybe with an ambassador or something like that. So that it frees you up to get on other campuses and then to start new huddles, like you were saying in West LA, which you're trying to do. But that means you have to be there. You can't be at the ones that are up and going and so forth. You have to be at the new ones.
Yes. And to your point, I get that it's challenging. It's challenging during the middle of the day when you have families that have more than one child and maybe some littles who need to get picked up at noon and at 12:30 that, when our huddles are going, or even 1 o'clock. So I do get the challenge. But God has been very gracious to us, and we've got a great volunteer base. But expansion is great. The more people we have, the more camps.
Amen. I love the fact that our youth ministers here at Kings Harbor are on different campuses all the time. I love that so much. I remember before Nathan was even here as a youth pastor, he was at another church. I was at South one time, and he was bringing his little baby, Stella, when she was just a little baby, like toting her along, and all the kids knew her, and it was really, really precious. I'm sure, I don't know if all schools would allow that, but they did, which is amazing. And it feels like in the South Bay, there is this little bit of a I don't know, they're just kind of welcoming to that kind of thing on the campuses. It seems like they're welcoming to FCA still, which is the grace of God. Because you mentioned earlier, we don't know when the time is going to come when the door closes for FCA to be on the campuses because of the times we live in and the day and age. I mean, even when we went through COVID and kids weren't even on campus, you had to get really creative, and you were meeting with the leaders, at least of these schools at parks, and doing your best to keep them encouraged and keep them connected, and keep them like close to one another and close to the Lord. But we don't know how long we have. And when you think about the opportunity that I think people are still shocked when they hear that a public campus allows this, that they allow the Fellowship of Christian Athletes to be on their campus and sharing Jesus and bringing Bibles and giving it out to the kids. Like, this is a grace of God, and that we don't know how long this door will be open. And it's like we have to take full advantage. Like, we should be on every campus, right? Like,
I agree.
Every
Come
campus,
on now.
Right? Every campus. There's enough Christians to cover every campus. And while we have the chance.
Up in the Bay Area, FCA got kicked out of the school, whole district, because of something that happened on campus. And it was probably 2-3 years in the courts. And, they ruled in favor of FCA. Thank you, Jesus.
But for 3 years, they could be on.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so the importance of not only having clubs on campus, but also raising up leaders, because even if the club's not there, that we have young people who have the presence of God in them, and that we walk with them and to empower them to go out and do that, as well as coaches to fill in that gap.
Amen. Where do you see yourself and your ministry in 10 years? It's a long time.
It is. I would love to see an FCA campus, or FCA in every campus, every middle school and every high school. I would love elementary school. There's a challenge. It would have to be before school, but there would be a lot of logistics to get through that. But that's why FCA sport is such a great avenue to have the little ones
to reach the elementary
So
age.
on every campus, every high school, middle school campus in 10 years, to have the staffing and the volunteers to do that, and also to be able to build out FCA sport, that whether it's beach volleyball or soccer or basketball or baseball or softball, that we have a lane for these kids to come, that they can get coached, not by a mom or a dad, but mom and dad can come and watch, but that there's quality coaching, but also that there's coaching that are gonna coach right and proper, and that is to be encouraging to free the kids up to play fearlessly instead of fearfully.
That's awesome. How can we as a church be praying for you?
A few areas. One of them is that God would continue to give us open doors to share the gospel, that he would draw people to himself. Jesus said, if I be lifted up, that I'll draw all men unto me. And we want to lift up Jesus everywhere we go. That we would be able to have the volunteer base, or at least the staffing, to be able to do that. And in a ministry that required to raise 100% of living expenses and ministry expenses, we've seen a lot of turnover.
Because you're like an urban missionary. You're here.
Yes.
So
yeah. We've seen a lot of turnover, and sometimes that leaves some holes that we come in, and God is very kind to help us fill that in the meantime. But that we'd be able to raise the funds for staffing, because that would be huge. And then the volunteer base to just go at it hard.
Imagine if money was not an option, or not an issue, or not an obstacle. Imagine you had such a huge amount of money to work with that you could hire people for every area where you needed schools to have huddles, and there's enough money out there, right? You just need to have access to it. That's awesome. Do you have a word of encouragement that you would like to give to just the next person coming after you, whether it's somebody who maybe is thinking about getting involved, maybe it's somebody who's in full-time ministry like yourself? What's the word of encouragement you want to leave?
First of all, that God's with you, and he has He's called you and he's gifted you. Keep your eyes on Jesus and keep the main thing, and that is to share the gospel and to care for people really well. He'll take care of the rest of it. And also, as Paul said, that he didn't come with enticing words of men's wisdom, but demonstration of spirit and power. And that to be on campus and to be a presence, but also that there would be such service and such humility that it would reveal God's kingdom and put Jesus on display in a spectacular way, that when kids walk by, that they're drawn in because something different's going on. Then when teachers or administrators ask, hey, what's going on in there? Or getting called in or being able to meet an administrator like, yeah, I've heard about what FCA is doing. Thank you. It's really cool. Just that they'd be impacted by that. And they'll be a great example.
Well, Tom, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing some of your story, sharing about FCA. I'm just grateful I get to be married to you because you're awesome. And I see you living for Jesus every day, 100%. And it makes me just excited to be a part of that in a small way. And what a blessing. I get to work at a church that loves FCA, and we even get to partner with FCA, and it's just so cool. So I love you. Kings Harbor Church loves you. And we're so happy that you joined us today. We can't wait to see you next time.
Jesus on me, Jesus on three. 1, 2, 3, Jesus!